Welcome to the Art of Recovery. This video is about taking a piece of tree and some epoxy and turning it into a beautiful glossy clock, like this one made from a pine tree inside Bell County Forestry Camp. If you would like to make one, begin by cutting your tree about 1.5 inches thick and anywhere between 6 and 10 inches wide, and let them dry completely. Then, choose the best looking side for the front and prime it with a clear water-based acrylic finish to seal the wood. After this dries, measure to find your center point and drill a hole completely through using the recommended size drill bit. I then took a walnut hollow clock mechanism from Blick Art, traced it on the back side, and then drilled out the entire center to leave a little under 3/4 of an inch, which is the length of the clock shaft. I used these drill bits, starting with the larger one of 1 1/8 inches and drilling first. Then, using the smaller bits to get to the corners. And finally, I cleaned up the space with hammer and wood chisels. Insert your clock and make sure the drilled depth allows you to screw the nut and washer on to attach your clock. You should also choose the top of your clock and drill a hole on the back side about halfway through to hang the clock on a screw on the wall. This is the more advanced pendulum model. All you need to do is determine the area needed to allow the arm to sweep back and forth, and then drill it out to the same depth of your clock. After this, I hung my clocks on the wall and put on the numbers, starting with 12, 6, 3, and 9, and then carefully fill in the rest of the numbers evenly around your clock face. I use a drop of Elmer's glue to hold my numbers in place, and as soon as this glue is dry, these clocks are ready for a coat of high gloss epoxy. First, put a piece of painter's tape or clear packing tape all the way around your clock. If needed, you can put in just a few staples to help hold it in place. Leave your tape above the surface about 1/4 of an inch so it will keep the epoxy from running over the edge until it thickens. Then, fill in the center hole with a little water paper towel to keep the epoxy from escaping through it. Mix enough epoxy to coat the outside of the bark when you pull off your tape after about 30 minutes to let the epoxy slowly run over the edge. The best looking clocks will be poured in 2 coats, allowing the first coat to dry and then pouring on a thin second coat to make sure it's coated evenly. Next, set up a workspace on a piece of plastic and mix your epoxy completely for at least 4 minutes, making sure to mix enough to fully coat your projects. For these 2 clocks, I have mixed 16 ounces to make sure I have plenty. I always pour slowly to make sure the epoxy is spreading evenly. The temperature of your workspace will decide how quickly it spreads, but I'll be using a heat gun on mine to help it and remove any air bubbles that I see. Just take your time. I sometimes speed things along by spreading the epoxy with a craft stick. Epoxy is self-leveling, so all the imperfections will hide with this stick. And after this, I'll use a heat gun. I usually use the heat gun 3 or 4 times to get all the bubbles out. I have a project for my leftover epoxy coming up in video number 10. A seashells and gems jewelry holder picture frame that is beautiful. It's easy to make. A perfect gift for a loved one. Okay. After about 30 minutes, I'll pull off my tape to allow the epoxy to run over the edge, and I'll make sure to coat the bark completely. When this epoxy is dry, it may need a second coat, and then I'll put on the hands and finish my tree clocks. I'll be back in a little bit. After letting them dry completely, my walnut tree clocks are now finished, and they will look wet and fantastic for a lifetime. Now you'll need to re-drill your center hole through the epoxy and attach your clock with a washer and nut before you put on your clock hands. These clocks take less than 4 hours to make with a little dry time in between the steps. If you're watching this from inside Bell County Forestry Camp, I hope this video has been informative and you are confident enough to make your own glossy tree clocks for your family. After this learning experience, there are several more pieces I made from those beautiful trees found there, like this guitar clock, wrapped in bark, or this log cabin clock with picture frames in the windows, and also this picture frame made from a piece of tree. Thank you for watching The Art of Recovery. Watch our next video if you'd like to learn how to make this epoxy jewelry holder picture frame.